Today I want to share with you 9 incredible tips and tricks that highlight how powerful JetBrains Rider really is. So stick around because I bet you don't know some of them, but also because I will be giving away a 1-year license for JetBrains.ultimate, which includes Rider. So if you are curious about Rider or you always wanted to use it, don't miss this opportunity. So let's take a look into the features. Let's start with the basics, the double shift. And by the way, sorry if during this video I mention a given shortcut that is not the one that you use, because Rider can map different types of key bindings, and also you can decide, for example, if you want to use the same shortcuts from Visual Studio or VS Code or the ones by JetBrains. So make sure that you go to the documentation and find the one that applies to you, to your use case. So I'll try to always mention the name of the feature so you can easily find it. And I decided to start with the double shift because this is one of those shortcuts that I use every single day when I'm on Rider and is extremely useful. So when you are on Rider and you use the double shift, it will basically open a kind of like a search window where you can start searching for things on your source code. Let's say, for example, I'm looking for the due date that is a symbol inside of one of my classes. And you can see it's a really good search window. What makes this special is not the ability to search for code. What makes this special for me is regarding this actions tab. So you can see here that I have the all, so I'm looking into every single thing. That means that I can as well look for actions. Example, do you want to change the theme? You can search for the option theme. So it's an action, it's a command that you have inside of your IDE. So for example, I could come here and decide to change theme quite quickly. For example, let's say that I want to use the dark theme from Rider. I can do it. So let me go back to my theme, done. For example, do you want to set a given setting on your IDE? Another example, there's one feature on Rider that I really like, and most people don't know it, and I really like it. That is this thing. Imagine you open this class and also this file. Let me move myself to this side. So now you can see that the file that I opened is highlighted on the screen here. But if I change my position into the program.cs, the highlight doesn't change. But there's a feature for that. So if you do the double shift, when you don't know where the thing is, just do double shift. And now I'll look for select open file. So now I can, through this window, using the double shift, I can change the option to always on. So that means that now, even when I'm moving around, you can see that the focus is changing. What is quite useful when you have a lot of files, at least to me, it's quite useful because I want to understand where the file that I'm positioned is in terms of solution structure. Not even that, but one thing that I like is that, for example, imagine that I have the projects collapsed. I can move around in the files that are already open, or for example, I can use something like the double shift, look for a new file, for example, repository, okay, and that one is the inside of the infrastructure project. So it means that is a project that is collapsed. When I go there, it will automatically open that project, what is pretty cool. Go to recent files or recent locations is another feature that I use quite often. So when you are working huge project, you go around through the files, and you will work in different files usually because they are related to a given feature. So usually, even having a ton of files on a given workday, you might only touch 5 to 6 different files. And sometimes they are spread across your solution in different folders. So it's quite useful to quickly navigate to them without using the mouse or needing to, for example, use the search every single time. So one thing that you can do, and on my case is the Control comma, is going to the recent files. So you can see that I have here opened recent files, the files that I've been working on. And if I do the Control comma once again, it will filter to only the ones that I did recently. So it's even better. If I have been changing some files and only trying to take a look into some of them, I can do that quite quickly here. The other option is, instead of going to recent files, is going to recent locations. Imagine that you have files that are extremely big, and for example, you have been copying or trying to understand the logic on a given part of a huge class, you can do that. For example, let's open here this one, and let's say that I'm concerned about this new object that I'm creating here, and I'm trying to apply this idea into a different place. So let's say that it was here, and now I want to go back to that place that I was before. So if we use a feature, by the way, double shift, that is the recent locations, there's a shortcut for that, but I honestly don't remember. If you go there, you can see a different type of window. So now I can see that is mentioning the Cosmos DB to-dos repository, but a set of lines where I was positioned when I left that file. So if I went to that file to take a look into a given part of the code, it will show me those lines. So it's kind of like the recent files, but specific to the lines that I've been working on. And I can also filter that to the ones that I changed, and I can quickly move into there, what is pretty cool. Refactorings is one of those things that JetBrains is well known for. When I used to use Visual Studio, I always wanted to install ReSharper, I have to confess. I love the amount of refactorings that you have access to. And by the way, that was one of the first things that conquered me when I came into Rider. It was the fact that I had an IDE that was extremely good, but also I have the feeling that with a single IDE, I had the same thing as Visual Studio plus ReSharper, but with a better performance. That was my feeling. So one thing that I love when I'm writing code is a quick access to refactorings. And there's mainly two things that I usually do. One is in the context of anything that I'm doing, I can always go into a given place. For example, let's go into this if statement. And here, if I use something like the options enter, because I'm on macOS, if you are on Windows, I think it's Alt enter. If you do that, you will see a list of quick refactorings that you can use in the context of that line. And on this case, for example, let's say that I don't want to use the equal sign. I want to call the method explicitly. I can quickly do things like this. It's not only that, but when you are writing code, you will start seeing those squiggly lines or things like this here. For example, when you see these things or when you see this light bubble, that means that there's a suggestion on something that you can do, and you can always use the same shortcut, the option enter, and you'll see what is suggesting. For example, in this case, is saying, okay, let's convert this into a primary constructor. I could do that. Honestly, I don't like primary constructors, so I could also come here and say to explicit constructor, and it can do all those things as well. Other option for refactorings that I really like is, for example, selecting a piece of code, for example, and then using the refactor this, and it will show you a lot of things that you can do. So, for example, if you want to rename to that, by the way, with the quick command R, you can rename something, for example, inlining a method or a lot of things that you can do. So it's extremely powerful, not only in the refactoring options that you have, but especially on those suggestions that something could have been better. For example, let's say that I go into this field and I do the command R, and I rename it to something like this. So now I'm not using the correct casing for the convention that I'm using. So if I go there, it's saying, okay, it doesn't match the rule. So do you want to change it? You can go there and do the same as always, rename, and it's done. So it's extremely powerful in terms of refactorings and in terms of suggestions that the IDE will be giving to you. So if you have used ReSharper in Visual Studio, you know the things that you will have access because it's exactly the same idea. Other feature that most don't know is opening code directly on GitHub, and I really like that one. How do you do it? Let's say that there's something here that I don't like, or I want to send this piece of code to someone to take a look, or I want to send something to someone in my team so we can see how we implemented a given part of our code. And I'm using GitHub. So I can do something as simple as this. I can select that piece of code, double shift, open on GitHub. I think this is part of the GitHub plugin. I'm not sure, but it's a feature that I use a lot, and I don't remember to install anything to have it. So if you do this and you press enter on that option, what will happen is that open in your browser the source code, okay, positioned on GitHub on that piece of code that you selected. So you can see even here the color changing. And the cool thing is that now you have a link that is referring this line of code, the 25 till 34. And you can quickly grab this link, send it to someone, and have a discussion with it, for example. I can guarantee that this is extremely useful when you work in the context of a team. Let's now take a look into some debugging features, and let's start with the inline watches. And the inline watches has some cool things that you can do with it. For example, imagine this simple code, okay? I just have a variable that I send to a method, and then it's returning it to another variable. And if you set the breakpoint there and we run the debugger, you can see inline the same thing, so the value of that variable. And there's another thing that I like, that is we can be in the context of a debugging session, and sometimes I want to change the code so I can capture a given value to facilitate the process of debugging. And often that's not easy to do, so we stop the session, we change some code to keep a given value in a given variable, and we rerun the code. One thing you can do is to go into your immediate window and do something as the following. Imagine that you want to understand if the result is an even number, for example, is even number. So what you could do is saying, okay, it's equal to the result mod 2 equals 0, okay? It's false. But now notice that now I have this thing named synthetic variables. So those variables that I created through the immediate window, they will show up here. Okay, so I can see them here. Can see the evaluation of them here. That is extremely interesting, but let's take a look into another thing. For example, let's say that we change the result here and we run the debugger. Let's set this one as an inline watch as well. And now let's just go to the next line, step over, and we can see that we have here the result, so as an line information. But also the interesting part is that this 2 now shows up with a different color. That means that the value has changed, what can be extremely useful during the process of understanding what is happening. Another feature that I really like in the debugging experience is the smart step into. So let's do the following. We have this method A and this method B, okay? And now the result will be calling the A, that will call the B, and as an input we'll have the ×2 of the result. Sometimes you'll find these type of things when you have a chain of calls, and when you are debugging, it's quite messy. And sometimes you don't want to go to the deepest point of that chain link, you want to go to a specific one. So let's say that I want to dig into the B without going to the ×2. So it would simplify to get there. So I have two options. I can go and set a breakpoint, continue, and it will eventually stop there. And I can use this debugging experience that I will show you. So set your breakpoint, run the debugger, and once you are here, do the following. Enable the Shift Smart Step Into. So Shift F7 in this case. Once you have that enabled, you can see different colors now popping up. And when I hover on the methods, I can see that I can do something with it. I can dig into them. So instead of going to this one, the ×2, that is the one that is selected, and by the way, you don't need to use the mouse to get there. You can simply get it away and do Tab to decide which one do you want. Let's say that I want the B. So I just press Enter, and the debugging process will get into that method respecting the execution flow, right? So now I can check what is happening here and continue. This is extremely useful. On these cases, I used to go there, set the breakpoint, continue. Now I don't want that anymore. It was a mess. Let's see one more debugging feature. The predictive debugger. The predictive debugger has some interesting things. So it'll try to understand what will happen next. So the way that I see it is like a prediction of the flow of the code. So in this case, even without executing those methods, it's predicting that the result will be bigger than 1. So that's why you can see this first if statement with a kind of like green color. It's not that clear because of my theme. And there you can find also this arrow saying, okay, this code will be executed. So if we F10 to go to next lines, we can see that is exactly what happened. And one interesting thing is that you keep going and it will start giving you even more data. For example, in this case, now I can see that, okay, the next line will not be executed. So it will colorize and will gray out these lines to understand that they will not be executed. But it's not only that. Why? If you scroll down, you can see that it can even try to spot exceptions that might happen. So if we go to this random thing, this method, it is right here, we can see that it's throwing an exception right away. And the predictive debugger is understanding exactly that. So when you see this symbol right here with that underlining, you know that it will throw an exception, and you can even see here in front of it in line the exception that you can expect. For that, you need to have enabled the predictive debugger and also the colorized mode. Okay, in the debugger, enable the colorized mode, both of them regarding the predictive debugger. With that in place, you should start seeing this type of behavior in your debugger. Before we keep going, we need to talk about pricing, because every single time that I talk about Rider, someone will say, okay, but I can start using Visual Studio for free, or I can use VS Code for free, and with Rider, I can't. So we need to talk about that because that is changing. When I started using Rider, effectively, it was an investment, but if you were using something like macOS, you didn't have a good option, to be honest. VS Code is not as good as Rider, in my opinion. But also, some of you might say, and I got messages like that, and I completely understand them, you might be from a place when it's not easy to start with an investment like that, to start using that IDE. So Visual Studio had that community edition that you can use for non-commercial projects, for example, and you could start with it. So the good news is that since last week, you can start using JetBrains Rider for free for non-commercial projects. What is pretty cool when you are building, for example, open source, or for example, you want to start learning .NET and you need an IDE, this is a great IDE to use. Or for example, you want to explore it, just give it a run, see if you really like it or not before taking the decision of buying it. You can now do it because JetBrains created this free version that you can use for non-commercial projects. But I have something even better for you. Since I really like this product, I'm giving away a free license, a 1-year license for the .Ultimate from JetBrains. That will give you access not only to JetBrains Rider, but also to ReSharper. You can use it as well for accessing some of the profilers that JetBrains has. It's the complete pack. It's an amazing tool that I use. I have access to the .Ultimate as well, and I think you will love it. So what do you need to do to be able to win that license? Just go to the link in the description and follow the instructions that you will find there. This is not the first giveaway that I'm running on this channel. Quite recently, I gave away a license to a conference, to an NDC conference. So if you want to participate in another giveaways like these ones, make sure that you subscribe. And now let's go back into our features. The integrated REST client is something that I use quite often. Some time ago, I published a video on how to bring an extension to use the REST client inside of VS Code. And what I will show you is basically the same thing. So, but this time I don't need to bring a plugin or anything like that. It's part of JetBrains Rider. So if you go to the Solution Explorer, for example, you go to a project and you create a file, you just name the file whatever you want, and you end the file with the extension HTTP. So in this case, I have one that is the API.http. Once I have that, I can now start calling the API directly from this kind of like Markdown file. It looks like a Markdown file. The cool thing is that this will be great documentation of what you are doing. If you want to see me talking about this in the context of the other extension, I will have a link here on the top, somewhere over there, I think, on the other corner. And it's basically the same idea. So you describe the HTTP method, the endpoint that you want to call, headers. We have here the content type, and then the body of the request. For example, do I want to perform a GET? Just go here and play it. And now I can see here in the bottom the result. Okay, it wasn't okay. So let's create now another one, for example, by Superbox, change the ID, run it. Okay, we got the result as well. We can see the headers, we can see everything. So instead of using something like Postman, you can do every single thing right here inside of a single file with the HTTP extension, what is pretty cool. Other thing that I really like is the database tooling. Without installing any plugin, extension, whatever, you have access to this database tool. So there you can configure a connection, for example, connect to a database. It will work with many types of databases, as you can see here. For example, let's go to Postgres. You will somehow find the correct connection string. I will connect to that. And now I have here basically a database client. I have the database objects. I can go to the tables. I have here my to-dos table. Can see the columns, can see keys. I can go and create, for example, a new column, a new ID. I can edit the data if I want. Okay, I have that experience going here and changing anything. There's other cool things that you can do here. For example, this was a complex database. I could generate the scripts. I could go and generate a diagram, what is pretty cool. So there's a lot of things that you can do with the tooling that comes inside of Rider. But the database tooling goes beyond this small window that will allow you to interact with the database. For example, in the context of your code, when you have a query, for example, something like SQL, and in this case, I'm using Cosmos, so it's not the same thing as using SQL Server, but you can see that he recognized that this is SQL. Okay, I can configure the dialect and come here and say, okay, this thing that you are using is, for example, MongoDB, let's say. Okay, I would save it, and now he recognizes the things that you can do. You can take advantage of the IntelliSense, all of those things. And Rider has one feature that I use all the time, and I think you should know. The feature is continuous testing, and you can see all about it right here. And I promise that once you start using it, it will be hard to go back.